Hello everyone, this is Group 4 of GED110. We're all aware that the materials that make up living things return to the physical world and are utilized by other living organisms. The constant supply of much needed materials to maintain life in ecosystems is ensured by such a cyclic material process called the biogeochemical cycle. So today we'll be talking about the sulfur cycle as part of the biogeochemical cycle, as well as its epigenetic changes, invasive species, and its anthropogenic implications.
I wonder about the impact of chemicals on our ecosystem, as biogeochemical cycle transport and transformation in ecosystem are facilitated by biochemicals. Wetland hydrologic conditions have a strong influence on this. Including this is the sulfur cycle. The sulfur cycle describes how sulfur moves through the geosphere and biosphere. Weathering releases sulfur from rocks, which assimilates by microbes and plants. Then, it moves to the food chain, where plants and animals assimilate it before being released when they decompose. Sulfur is required to properly function proteins and enzymes in plants and animals that rely on plants for sulfur. Sulfur is absorbed by plants when dissolved in water. Animals consume these plants to ensure that they get enough sulfur to stay healthy. These compounds contribute significantly to acid rain, which can kill sensitive aquatic organisms and harm marble monuments and stone buildings.
Now, let's talk about epigenetics. Epigenetics, also called epigenomics, is the study of how cells manage gene activity without altering the DNA sequence. There are three types of epigenetic changes: DNA methylation, histone modification, and non-coding RNA. DNA methylation occurs when a chemical group is added to DNA. This group is usually added to specific locations on DNA where it prevents proteins from attaching to DNA and reading the gene. Demethylation is a method that can be used to remove this chemical group. Methylation typically turns genes off, while demethylation turns them on. Next is histone modification, wherein the DNA is wrapped around histone proteins. Proteins that read the gene cannot reach the DNA wrapped tightly around histones. Chemical groups can be added or removed from histones to modify whether or not a gene is wrapped or unwrapped. And lastly, non-coding RNA is the process wherein your DNA serves as a blueprint for producing both coding and non-coding RNA. Proteins are made from coding RNA. Non-coding RNA regulates gene expression by combining with particular proteins to break down coding RNA, preventing it from being utilized to produce proteins. Proteins may be recruited by non-coding RNA to alter histones to switch genes on or off.
Now let's hear what the best to say about invasive species.
Invasive species are everywhere in the world. But what exactly is invasive species? Invasive species are either plants or animals introduced from another environment and were accidentally or purposefully introduced into a new place. They are organisms that may cause damage to their new surroundings and can be harmful to an ecosystem's natural resources. Now, you're probably wondering why invasive species are included here. Invasive species are capable of causing loss of habitats. They compete with native organisms for limited resources and can cause the extinctions of native plants and animals, and can completely alter habitats. They got into places due to unintentional release by people, or they sometimes scatter on the hulls of vessels as they travel. Some invasive species are simple to deal with and can be controlled, but others continue to threaten the environment. The water hyacinth problem is a good example. The changes of water chemistry and the reduction of oxygen and light affect the surrounding flora and fauna. They also clog the irrigation systems and waterways.
And lastly,
anthropogenic influences and global climate change are two of the most pressing concerns for forest ecosystem protection in both developing and developed countries. The demand for tropical forest exploitation has increased as a result of fast population development in emerging countries. Because of the enormous population growth in cities over the last decades, many people have migrated from metropolitan areas to build new communities in tropical woods. Those immigrants have excessively exploited tropical ecosystems. Unlike indigenous people, urban immigrants lack traditional knowledge and skills on how to manage natural forests sustainably, causing significant damage to forest ecosystems. The fast extension of these existing populations into protected areas is likely to result in serious anthropogenic degradation and fragmentation of natural forests, worsening forest structure and biodiversity in major natural tropical forests. As a result of such anthropogenic influences, forest ecosystems' ecological functions are degraded.